This is devotional number 227, and today's date is April 25th, 2017. And this week we're looking at Isaiah 53, and we're down to verse 2, speaking of the promised Messiah. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. The Hebrew word for form is Strong's number 8389, and it's translated a number of different ways in English and conveys the idea of beautiful, goodly, comely, and countenance. For example, we read about Esther as being fair in Esther 2, verse 7. And he, speaking of Mordecai, brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. For she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. In 1 Samuel 16:18, David is described as being comely. Then answered one of the servants, this would be the servants of Saul, and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and Jehovah is with him. In 1 Samuel 25:3, we also learn this about Abigail, who became one of David's wives when her first husband died. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding, and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. Isaiah 52:14 parallels Isaiah 53:2 in showing the absence of beauty. Thus the statement, he hath no form, emphasizes the fact that Christ had to become sin for his people prior to the foundation of the world. He had to die. In fact, he had to be annihilated. And then he rose from that death, from that annihilation, because God is eternal and he can't stay dead. As many were astonished at thee, his visage was so marred, more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. That's interesting because in this verse, the Hebrew word for marred is used only one other time, and it's translated as corruption in Leviticus 22:25. And I'll start with verse 24 of Leviticus 22 to get the context. But ye shall not offer unto Jehovah that which is bruised, or crushed, or broken, or cut. Neither shall ye make any offering thereof in your land. Neither from a stranger's hand shall ye offer the bread of your God of any of these, because their corruption is in them, and blemishes be in them. They shall not be accepted for you. Now, in the context, this is speaking of the chief characteristic of the offerings that God had prescribed in the Old Testament, namely perfection. Of course, all of those Old Testament offerings pointed to the Messiah who embodied perfection, signifying his absolute sinlessness. Yet, he had to become sin, as we read about in the New Testament, as well as the Old, and he had to become corrupted. And there are other passages I believe in Jonah, for example, where he speaks of, in Jonah 2, about bringing up his life from corruption. And Jonah 2 has to do with the belly or the womb of hell, which is what Christ had to succumb to as he had to die and be annihilated, and then, of course, rise again. I'll read Isaiah 53:2 again. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. The Hebrew word for comeliness is very pregnant with meaning that are expressed by a number of English words such as beauty, honor, and majesty, among others. For example, in Job 40, verse 10, we find this proclamation: Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Here God is speaking to Job as if to say, you try doing this. You try decking yourself with majesty and excellency and arraying yourself with glory and beauty, because that's what I do. God is speaking about himself. In Psalm 104, verse 1, he also emphatically declares, the psalmist there, Bless Jehovah, O my soul. O Jehovah my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty. We thrill, of course, to hear of these magnificent descriptions of the Lord Jesus Christ, yet we must never lose sight of the fact that the Messiah had to become the very opposite of this beauty. In other words, he had to become sin for us. He had to take on our repulsive, shameful, degrading sin in order to redeem each believer, not only from sin and from annihilation. The word for beauty that God uses here is also found as sight in Genesis 2:9. And out of the ground made Jehovah God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We can only imagine how captivatingly beautiful this garden, which God had created, must have been, along with the rest of his creation. In 2 Samuel 11:2, we witness how beauty became a stumbling block for King David. The word here is translated to look upon. And it came to pass in an evening tide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's home. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. Although Bathsheba was another man's wife, David did not heed the admonition of Proverbs 6:25. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart. The word for lust, however, happens to be rendered as desire in Isaiah 53:2. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. And this is because of the fact that he had become completely repulsive, completely degraded with the sins of his people. And as a result, God the Father had to turn away, as it were, from him, and he had to punish him. And the punishment we know for sin is death and annihilation. And this is in spite of the fact that the Lord Jesus Christ is the supreme essence of beauty in himself, as God the Son. He is the lily of the valley, the rose of Sharon, and the bright and morning star. And he had to become what you and I are by nature: disgusting, vile, loathsome, and abominable.